Hello, this is James Reese for another edition of Razorwire. We're doing another interview today. I'd like to welcome Ian Murphy from CyberOff. You may have seen some of his fantastic content that he's been releasing on LinkedIn. Really been looking forward for this particular interview. Ian, do you want to kind of introduce yourself? Welcome to the channel, by the way.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name's Ian Murphy, and I am CEO and founder of CyberOff, which our real whole raison d'etre is to help people improve their cyber savvy so they can stay safer online. And I do that through making myself look like a complete idiot on videos, which is I seem to have a gift for.
Oh, they're really good. I think you're getting a lot of good response actually off of the guys, and I know there's a couple of other content creators who quite often get involved with your channel or some of the stuff that you produce as well. It's been brilliant actually. It's nice to see a light-hearted way of like bringing out some of that infosec stuff, because let's face it, some of the other content that you see from sort of video content, what have you, is a little bit on the dry side, and sometimes it's quite hard to get through. But some of the content that you've produced has definitely been really interesting in the way that it's portrayed. I think it's fantastic.
Thank you.
So tell us.
I was going to say, for me, it doesn't particularly feel too much like work because it's just lots of fun to do,
And that's it. And I think, at the end of the day, infosec can be fun. I mean, there's a lot of weird stuff that goes on in this industry, and a lot of strange ways that you have to look at things. So it's great to see some of the content that you're producing. It is genuinely good, But so tell us a bit about your history. How did you get into this? I mean, what's your background?
So my background, my trade is a mechanic. I trained as an apprentice as a mechanic. I got to the end of that 4 years. I got fed up of smelling of diesel and oil coming home of an evening, and decided to go to university because my passion was electronic engineering. Actually, that's not quite true. My passion was football, right? Mm-hmm. And I even until I kind of retired from semi-professional football up to the age of 30, I still had a feeling that I could make it in the professional game, right? So that was my passion. I've been lucky enough to play with some great teams and some great players and some great ex-pros, and also to play at Wembley as well. So I've been really fortunate, but I've been unfortunate as well in terms of broken legs and bad knees and stuff like that. So nearing 50 now, every time I get out of my chair, I seem to creak and sigh and groan every time I'm getting out. I think it's the football. At least that's what I'm putting. But yeah, my actual passion ever since I got my first computer back in the mid 80s, which was a ZX Spectrum, was electronic engineering, doing something in that field. I had a couple of older cousins, one who worked in lasers, one who worked for BT, who kind of caught my imagination with it. They were 10 years older than I was. Mm-hmm. So I kind of blagged my way onto a university course with no real qualifications, and then started working for the Ministry of Defence from there. And then that was my introduction to cybersecurity nearly 30 years ago. It was back in 92. I started working with the Ministry of Defence, so it's nearly 30 years ago. And ever since then, I've tried to do everything. I've been a techie, I've been a salesperson, I've been a pre and post sales engineer. I've done startups, I've done contract, and I've done consulting. So I've tried to cover most things in my career within cybersecurity, and I must have failed at all of them because now I'm doing silly videos for people.
No, I think, one of the things, because I've mentored a number of people over the years, and one of the things I say to a lot of the youngsters coming up in this, I say youngsters, some of them aren't, but, is get a good variety of experience across as many different channels as possible. The infosec space is really, really wide. It's really, really broad, with a lot of different specialities. And I think one thing I've seen is every now and then you come across people where they specialize just a little bit too early. So they've got massive amounts of knowledge in one specific area, maybe IDS, IPS, or network architecture or whatever. but then they don't really have that kind of experience of like governance, and good policies and procedures, that kind of thing. And whilst I don't think that's a big issue, especially if you're happy to carry on down that route, one of the things that I found with this information security discipline is very much you have to have kind of a wide understanding of the people, the process, the technology, and how it all kind of comes together, because there's no silver bullet in infosec. I called it infosec. It's now cybersecurity. I don't know what it's called these days. It's whatever's sexy at the time. But I think it's important to get that kind of broad range as early as possible and just get involved. There's so much to do in this space.
Yeah, I agree. I think one of the most invaluable things I ever did was my apprenticeship. I think it taught me as a 17-year-old kid from school how to relate and talk to other adults who I was now in a peer group with, instead of being in a hierarchical group where your interaction with adults up until you leave school is either your parents or your older relatives or your teachers at school. So it's all hierarchical in nature. So it's always yes, sir, please, and all of that type of stuff. But when you go into a working environment, especially a garage working environment where there's old mechanics and men who tell dirty jokes and kind of start giving you different life experiences, it really helps you. And I think part of what we see today is we see kids leaving university having been in education up until mid to late 20s, some of them, especially if they're doing PhDs. So they're missing that experience of how to relate to other adults in a peer relationship, because they're still in a hierarchical one with their professors and lecturers at university, and the peers they're forming are of their own age from similar backgrounds and things like that. So, I think it's something I would never change for anything. I think it. And also, I think that type of stuff comes out in my videos as well. A lot of the humor that I use in the videos, and a lot of the anecdotes and a lot of the experiences were born in those early days.
Absolutely, and I think what I like about your videos is it does sound like somebody genuinely talking, not as I said before. A lot of training videos you see tend to be very dry, scripted. I mean, obviously you probably run off a script, but I kind of get the impression that some of it is very kind of at the moment, whatever it is you're trying to portray across. It's not like you're just reading it off an auto cue or something like that. And I think that's important. I mean, you've touched on an important point about how to communicate, and a lot of the people that we've interviewed, some of the CISOs and some of the professionals in the game, all of them, bar none, I think have said learning how to communicate with people, depending upon obviously who they are, you might communicate slightly differently with different people, but it's one of the more important skills to learn in InfoSec, because it is a hard game. And a lot of people sometimes that you're communicating with, they don't quite have the same mindset. IT people really are there to kind of keep things running, keep things moving, improve upon the technology and make things more efficient and effective, Whereas InfoSec people, we have to sit there and think of some of the worst possible things that can happen and how we're going to either preemptively do something to prevent it from occurring, or create a plan on what we're going to do if it does occur. And sometimes communicating that information to people who have a very different mindset, especially in the development space. I mean, there's a good example, developers do brilliant jobs and they're developing all kinds of fantastic stuff, but sometimes security is not quite on their, what's the best way to describe it? It's not quite, yeah, it's they're not really considering it at that point. They want to develop it first and then secure it, which, let's face it, can be a bit of a challenge in itself. So no, it's interesting. I mean, is there any other soft skills that you've learned in your time that you could recommend to people who are up and coming?
Don't be overawed by titles and business titles or money. Really, if somebody claims they're an entrepreneur or have done, sold businesses or stuff like that, a broken clock is right twice a day, right? So
Yeah.
don't just look at that and think, yeah, everything they've got to say is gospel. I'd canvass a wider set of opinions and things like that. If people are giving you advice, and I think also, and this is almost counterintuitive, but if people are giving you advice, kind of think, why are they doing that? Are they just generally nice people who want to give value and want to help others, of which I find our industry is really good at, actually, or are they on some kind of ego trip as well? My advice to most people is do the exact opposite of whatever I've done, and you should be golden then.
Well, you seem to be doing it pretty right. So, at the end of the day, I mean, as I said, it's a hard game, and there's no. I have found that I've done guest lecturing and stuff, and I've done some of the mentoring on some of the guys and girls from there, and I've said to them, there's no one right path. There's no one right way of moving from a student in InfoSec into creating a full-blown career. But learn how to communicate, learn how to talk to people, and I do say similar kind of thing to them. Actually, if you're talking to a CEO, they're still people. They still have concerns. They might have slightly different concerns from, say, middle management or the IT department people or the finance department or the PR department. But if you can flip your mindset into to the look at how people are interacting with you from a particular department, it's a really, really good skill to have. Comms is everything, really. Something taken slightly out of context can have quite bad ramifications.
Yeah, I also think as well that there's an eagerness to earn a salary that people think is justified for them when they come out of university or whatever. And I've found you need to do your time on the tools. Yeah. You need to spend that time. Okay, it mightn't be as long as when we were starting out. I get that, but you do need to do that, and you do need to take your time over certain things, and not expect that the riches that you see other people maybe getting, or that you may read in these salary surveys, happen just overnight. It's not a God-given right that you're going to get that stuff. Work hard, and you can work towards that.
Absolutely, 100% agree. And I think I had this conversation with a couple of lecturers, and sort of back in the day, and I said, look, stop telling these guys that they're going to walk straight into like 70, 80, 90, 150 grand a year jobs. It doesn't work that way. Any time you get into a new career, as you quite rightly put it, you've got to do your time. You've got to do that graft. And I think when I've had sort of newcomers come into InfoSec when I was working directly for companies, one of my favorite things, and I've mentioned this in another video, was to put them straight away, after they've done their orientation and we've had the conversations, maybe, a week in, I put them on help desk for 2 weeks. And quite often they'd say, why have you put me on help desk? I'm doing stuff, I want to do InfoSec. And I said, look, once you've experienced people shouting and screaming at you because they can't change the password, or once you've helped a few people out and you've realized, every change that you make in InfoSec has an impact potentially to people like help desk and what have you. And now you've learned what it's like to be there, to do that job. Anytime you say change the password complexity or whatever, you know how hard it is for those guys. And you can relate to them, and you'll have a much better relationship with them. And most of the people that I did very well. There was one or two who kind of quit and said, no, I'm not in for this. But it's important to do your time. It's important to realize that for the first 5 years, don't chase the riches, chase the experience, chase the dream of where you want to go, but keep it open. Don't charge in expecting, oh wow, I've got my degree, I'm now worth 150 grand a year.
Yeah, and it's important to learn from experience, because that was one of the things I loved. Again, going back to my apprenticeship, there's a lovely story I like to tell, because very similarly, as you do your apprenticeship, you're moved around different stations to get a feel for all the different trades, not just not just your own trade, but you go through different stations. And I was put with the welder, the garage welder, old Jack, and he was coming to the end of his time in terms of retirement and things like that. And I'd just learned about arc welding and the different settings and all that type of stuff. So I was working with him. And if people don't know, when you do arc welding, you're passing electrical current through a rod which is welding something together, and you have to get that current right. Now on Jack's machine, all the figures were wiped off on his machine. And for different sizes of rods, you got different currents that you have to pass through them. And I remember saying to him when we were out on a job, Jack, shouldn't that be on a higher amperage? And but you've got no markings on your machine. How do you know what amperage that is? Because in the table it tells you to do this. And he turned to me and he said something to me I'll never ever forget. He said, "Listen, son," he said, you may be able to tell me how to weld, but I can show you how to weld." And it really stuck with me, because there's two approaches to this. There's understanding what's in the textbook, and then there's understanding how it happens in real life. And I think when somebody comes out of university, they've got that textbook, they may have some working experience, but they've got that textbook there. And I think they do well to remember that actually these guys that are out there who are doing it day in, day out, have the war stories, have the anecdotes, have a lot of experience that they can now start taking in as a sponge to make them those guys of the future. By guys, I'm talking about everybody, by the way. I'm not being singular about males. I'm talking about everybody in the industry. But it was just a wonderful anecdote that has stuck with me forever,
I think that's brilliant, actually, and it is very good. A very, very good anecdote. You can have all the book learning and the book smarts that in the world, but going out and doing it is very, very different. You learn. I must admit, I learned more probably in my first 5-6 years of being an InfoSec some 25 years ago than I could ever have learned doing the CISM stuff or the CISSP stuff. Great stuff, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't prepare you for the kind of stuff that you're going to be experiencing, especially when you get into to doing actual InfoSec. So, I mean, what significant events do you think has molded InfoSec as the way it is today historically? I mean, you mentioned sort of getting into it kind of in the 90s, and that was kind of when I did it, and the internet was still young and wild back then, and all kinds of weird and wonderful things used to get emailed around and you had access to. But we've had 25 years to get to where we are now. It's very different today than it was back then. Is there any significant events that you think has shaped that?
I think maybe Slammer and NIMDA, when they happened in the early 2000s, I think they made people sit up and understand the abilities and the capabilities of malicious code and these blended types of approaches, I think prior to that, it's not that stuff didn't happen, because you have more annoyances, the I love you and the code red and all that type of stuff. And in fact, the first virus was written in the early 1970s. So if people have a history of security, they'll understand that as a thought experiment that happened in the 1970s. And then the first AV program. So the first virus was called Creeper. The first AV program was called Reaper, developed by the friend of the guy who wrote the virus. So they became thought experiments. I think the big thing that caught everybody cold was potentially Slammer. I think from then to now, so what's that? Early 2000s. So in nearly 20 years, I don't particularly think we've seen a real step change in our ability to take security seriously enough that it becomes a board issue straight away. I think we still have to fight for that voice. I think that next step will be us showing executives that security is a business enabler, and showing it through a lot of what we've just spoke about, a lot of being human, communication, not using fear, uncertainty, and doubt to sell the
Yeah.
vision, tapping into different emotions, thinking like a business person rather than thinking like a techie first, then trying to impose your technical prowess on somebody else. And I think that's an evolution for us in the industry to get right. We need to cross. I hear so many people say, security needs to be a business enabler, as if it's the business's problem to make that an enabler.
Mm-hmm.
But so often we have been condescending, snary ivory tower dwellers who look down our nose on people who don't get what we're trying to tell them, as if they're some kind of idiot, which they're not. It's just not interesting to them. And we need to cross that street and start talking their language instead of just lobbing stones across the street saying, you don't get security, you deserve everything you get. It's a cultural change for us, which will help that cultural change in the business. I think that's the next kind of step. And there's lots of good stuff out there that's helping that, things like frameworks and things like that. And more and more businesses realizing that actually, if we get some of these basics right, and by the way, if I use the term basic, it doesn't mean it's easy to do. It's really difficult to do. But if we get some of these basics right, we don't need some shiny salesperson coming in selling us the next silver bullet or the next wonder solution. We've got, if I go back to my childhood, we've got the Morecambe and Wise sketch. We've got all the right notes. We're just not necessarily playing them in the right order, So, and there's lots of cost advantages there for the business to do that. I think everybody gets it. Everybody understands we don't need an attack. We don't need to lose data. But everybody still has these confirmation biases in their head that we're all born with. I'm better than average. It'll never happen to me. And all of that type of stuff that we have to fight to overcome. And again, just bringing it back to the videos, that's exactly what I want to try and do, is fight to overcome that stuff, and I always get well, don't you think they're a bit edgy for work and stuff like that? And I do say to people, look, you need bravery and confidence that this type of stuff will get the engagement that you require to help that cultural expansion happen. Because if you're going to do what you've always done and expect different results, Einstein's famous saying, that's the very definition of insanity.
No, totally agree. And I think, what I like about InfoSec today is it has been a rising star for a while. I mean, we've had the pandemic and it's made things go a little bit crazy in a lot of different areas. But I think a lot of what I'm hearing now is because a lot of people are now going to be working from home on a regular basis, and it's become a permanent thing. I mean, before all of this kicked off at the beginning of last year, working from home was a thing, but it was, you did it once a week. If you were working somewhere, you tend to do it once, maybe twice a week.
Generally a Friday or a Monday if you'd had a heavy weekend, right?
Basically, yeah.
Planning a heavy weekend.
And people have been talking about this utopia of working from home and all the rest of it, but nobody really took it seriously. And then of course all of this kicked off, and boom, everyone's working from home, and now people have realised that better quality of life working from home, spend a bit more time with the kids or the partner, whatever. But also you can save a large amount of money from not having a big corporate office in London. The kind of £2 million a year for 15 square feet of office. Everyone can work from home. But then from a security standpoint, it completely changes where we are in the InfoSec space. And I think a lot of people have suddenly realized that, home networks are horribly insecure as a general rule. No matter what Kool-Aid the telecommunications providers may tell you about how awesome their routers and what have you. Well, we all know they're crap, they're trash. Sorry, BT out there, if you're listening, but they are, so it's definitely changing, and the view of security is changing as well. There's a lot more people talking now about having CISOs at least advising the board, the board, not necessarily on the board, but advising the board. And I think that's quite important, because for a long time, InfoSec people have been kind of in the IT department, which it doesn't really work that well if you're trying to do policies or procedural governance things, because people say, well, you're in the IT department, can't you just stick a piece of AV in? Can't you stick a firewall in and make it all better again? Yeah. There's no silver bullet, as you pointed out. It's a blended approach. So no, that's great. So for newcomers coming in, what barriers do you think that they need to overcome these days?
Barriers. There's the old experience versus qualifications and all that barrier, right? I think I think if I was, and I try and say to, so my son's at university now, his first year, and he wants to go into the football industry. And I try and say to him, look, if you want to do that, you need to make yourself different from the thousands of other people that are out there wanting to get into the industry. Why would I want to employ you over that next person? And for me, it's always about attitude, and it's always about personality, and it's always about qualifications kind of last-ish. You know, I'm not saying they don't matter. I'm not saying that education doesn't matter. But I always find that if I've got a kind of willing, passionate person with the right type of attitude, I got more of a chance of them becoming a success than somebody who has a really good memory and is gifted in remembering stuff and can write that down within 3 hours to get a first-class degree. But it doesn't show me too much about what they are about as people, you know. So I think that's one of the barriers I try and say to him. Try and network, try and expand it, try and get to the right people. Even now, be 3 years before you've got your degree, start expanding it out. If you want to be a football agent, go and talk to other agents. Go and get introductions from other. You know, I'm still connected in the football industry. Yeah, I'll happily connect you to my friend who's coach at Accrington and all that type of stuff. You know, so it's about kind of breaking those barriers if you don't have the experience, to show that you care enough about it to do more than the kid next to you who's qualified with the same type of degree, who hasn't got that type of hunger or doesn't show that type of hunger. You know, I think that's one of the biggest things. Most kids, I say kids, that's wrong, isn't it? They're adults, but most kids coming out to university, because I'm 50 this year, I think that's one of the great things they can have in their arsenal to help them stand out.
That's a good one, actually. Bit of marketing knowledge, you know, speaking to the right people. I think that's really, I think that is really important. Actually, it's not something that's talked about that often. I mean,
show it as well. By the way, it's okay to say I'm passionate about this, but willing to, before anybody comes to you with free internships or anything like that. And I don't believe in free labor or anything like that. But if somebody came to me and said, "I've been researching your profile and I see you do this. Can I get involved?" And I'll happily do, you know, a couple of hours a week for absolutely nothing more than experience. That's very rare. Coming back to that money thing, people come out of college expecting loads of that.
Yeah,
it's really rare to do that, you know.
I don't think I've ever had any money, so I don't worry about it anymore. You know, you know, when you don't have it, who cares? But no, that's brilliant. I mean, so let's say, you know, you've got a young InfoSec person, and they've come to you and they've said, right, I've done my degree, I'm coming to the end of it. What do I need to plan for? You know, what are the important milestones from your perspective? Should I, as an InfoSec person up and coming, I want to be, you know, a great InfoSec person. I want to be a CISO. You know, what would you advise me?
Breadth of experience in terms of life experience, not just, you know, I know how to configure a firewall and I know what that signature means and I can capture that flag. That's all great. That is all great. But I think some rounded experience of other stuff, of other bits of life, that because I very rarely find that the situation that I'm in demands that I know everything about that security thing. I generally find it requires that, you know, part of my background gives me an ability to see that in maybe a slightly different way that has nothing to do with security. And all of that comes together to develop, you know, that gut feel that people talk about. And that can only come with experience, by the way, but that experience only comes with breadth of experience across different things. So I drag in from from my past, whatever that may be, whether it be my apprenticeship, whether it be the multitude of different dressing rooms and managers I've ever played for, or players I've ever played with, or great teams I've ever been in. You know, I draw all of that to make a decision or to make a kind of judgment or an approach on something. Sometimes it's wrong. Most of the times it's wrong, but sometimes it's right, you know? And I think possibly one of the other things is don't sweat the wrong decisions either, because you'll make them. Nobody goes through life. Here's a news flash for the first class honours student that comes out who's never failed a test in their life. You're gonna mess up. You're gonna mess up at some point, and actually, you need a decent network and communication structure around you to help you when you do, because it'll come as a bit of a shock the first time it happens.
Yeah, that first fail tends to fail hard, doesn't it? I think we've all had that. I had that. I won't talk about it, but my God, you know, I've seen a few howlers in my time. What about certifications? You know, I think we're lucky in InfoSec because there are a few out there. Every now and then new ones pop up and older ones disappear. But, you know, I hear a lot of people saying, oh, you know, I want to get all the certifications. And I say to them, I said, why? You know, I mean, when you've reached 10 years in the game, it's useful to have a cert, you know, a CISM or a CISSP or whatever. But people aren't looking at that. What are your opinions on certs?
If you're going for jobs that are first barrier that you need to get over, generally people will ask for CISM or CISSP generically across most jobs. I only maintain 2 certs now: my fellowship of the BCS and my CISSP, which I've held for nearly 20 years now. But it's still kind of, I wonder, do I derive any value out of it rather than just a kind of rose-tinted view of I've had that the longest, therefore I'm going to maintain it. I think certs are an important step in your career to let you validate your experience at a point. That's what the CISSP gave me when I got it in 2003. It gave me validation. I think after that, which is nearly, as I say, nearly 20 years, becomes a game of keeping your CPDs up to scratch and paying your membership fees. And then I think, is it worthy? What's that, over 20 years? What is it, $180 odd a year? That's
something like that.
It's a lot of money, right? Over 20 years. I suppose it's paid it back in terms of getting through certain CV sifts and things like that. So I see their usefulness in and of themselves. They are no more useful than my certificate I got as a 10-year-old for jumping in the deep end of a pool with my pajamas on to rescue a rubber brick. It's just a validation at a point in your life. I think the chasing of them and the accumulation of them for some is what they're all about. For me, it will always be about experience, not just in cyber, but the experience the person has outside of cyber as well. Because the times I've interviewed people for stuff, I want to know more about that thing that makes them tick, rather than they have a list of certs as long as they're on.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been running Razorwire now for I don't know, 14 odd years or so. And I've interviewed a lot of people in my time, and I rarely ever go by certs. I think, certs there's a place for them. I think if you're in the mid part of your career, it's a good way of getting, as you say, through the CV sifters and all the rest of it. But when you reach sort of like 20 odd years, I mean, I've got my CISM. I've maintained that for years and years and years. I haven't even looked at the content of a CISM certification since I got it. I don't even know what's in it anymore. Obviously I've got a rough idea because I've been through it. But I mean, the only one that I maintain, that I have to maintain every year and have to do the same exam and stuff, is the PCI-DSS stuff. I've spent 3 days sitting listening to American voices tell me about payments and how to secure them, which is good. It keeps me up to date, especially from the changes. But You know, other than that, certs for me are useful in the mid part of your career. Later on, once you've got the experience, I think, you know, people just kind of look at it and go, oh, yeah, he's got a cert, so what? You know, what's he done? You know, so for me, it's mindset. You can't, you know, I've met people with millions of certs, C-risk, CISA, you know, comp, you know, all of the certs that you could feasibly see. But I wouldn't trust them to look at a firewall, you know. I wouldn't trust them to build me a firewall rule set.
It's that old saying, isn't it? All the gear, no idea. You know,
Yeah.
it's like the first time I stepped out onto a ski slope, dressed head to toe in my lovely, brand new, shiny, expensive ski stuff, and then fell flat on my ass every time I.
Brilliant. So, what skills do you? I mean, you've mentioned kind of like bit of marketing, communication. What other skills should people getting into the field seriously look at developing? I mean, either soft or hard. You know.
I think people should have a solid grounding in networking. I mean, you know, TCP/IP rather than, hey, my name's Ian, what do you do? So people should have, if they're going into it, into any kind of, you know, whether that be being a firewall person or being an IDS person or being an analyst in a SOC, whatever it may be. I think a really good grounding in networking is important to understand how, you know, how a packet gets from one machine to another, or how an application works and the you know the OSI stack and all that type of stuff. That was one of the very early things I learned, and I can still remember bits of it now. Don't ask me to name the 7 layers of the stack. Physical at the bottom, application at the top, stuff in between. So I think that's important. But I think the big one, which we've touched on lots of times in this discussion, is communication. You know, seek first to understand before you can be understood, I think is what Stephen Covey says in his 7 principles. And it's really true. You know, if you can understand where other people are coming from, then you can maybe be understood where you're trying to come from and what you're trying to do. And that aims for effective communication. I think too often, you know, we come into an organization or into a discipline and we build a silo straight away, or the silo's already built for us. I think one of the other things is learn to break those silos, learn to get out of them and get amongst other people. And that's where communication helps, you know. So go and speak to the IT guy who's never got on with the security guy because they just wear their technical badges with prowess and they, you know, they're just button heads all the time, and see if you can take a different approach with them.
Brilliant. No, absolutely agree. So we're reaching the end of our time, and here comes the question I ask every person I interview. So rewind time right back to that first day that you got that phone call and told, yep, you've got your job in InfoSec, way back when, you know, times were different and it's the mid-90s. Maybe you've gone to a bar or a coffee shop or whatever and you sat there reveling in the fact that you've just got your first new job. I remember when I got my first proper job, it was certainly a breath of fresh air. If you could go and sit down next to yourself, as you are now, to your young self, and offer yourself a few little bits of advice based on what you know now and who you were back then, what would it be?
Have a bit more faith in yourself. Trust your own ability. Because actually over that 20 or so years, you've been right more times than you've been wrong. And even when you are wrong, it's not the worst thing in the world. I've spoken about lots of those things recently, you know, and during this chat around, you know, don't be overawed by job titles or stuff like that. You know, don't take others' opinions as gospel. Just because they may have been successful once doesn't mean that they have the formula to be successful time and time again. So just trust your own gut feel a little bit more and guide yourself, because actually you've got the answers, you've got the hard work, you've got the ability to do it, and nobody else is going to do it for you, no matter what they say. And if anybody does do it for you, they're either a rare individual or they're lying to get something.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, thank you ever so much for coming onto the channel. If anybody has any questions for Ian, communicate them through to us, and I'll give him an email, or maybe get him on another video, if he's happy to do that after this.
Always happy. See, my other alternative answer to saying something to myself is what many people may or may not know is back in about 2012, I was on a TV game show called Red or Black.
Really?
The premise of the game show, so it was Ant and Dec who hosted it. The premise of the game show was a bunch of different stupid tasks with the answer red or black, and they whittled 1,000 people down to one person who at the end of the show had the chance to choose red or black for £1 million. I was that last person, and I chose red because I'm a Liverpool supporter. So I go back and say, choose black, you dickhead. Before.
Oh, £1 million. I don't know what I'd do with £1 million if I was that age. I'd probably just end up buying silly things.
It's that old Georgie Best joke, isn't it? The old Georgie Best joke when the waiter comes into his room, he's been to the casino, he's had a big win, there's money all over his bed, there's supermodels left, right and centre in his room, and the waiter looks at George and says, George, where did it all go wrong?
Right. Okay. So thanks ever so much for joining us. As I said, if you've got any questions, then please feel free to email them through. If you've got any comments or you want us to cover anything specifically on this channel, or maybe we can get, some of the interviewers back. I have a vague idea I might get 2 or 3 of them into the same kind of chat room and let them do battle, a bit Thunderdome-y, to talk about InfoSec, again, but this time in a group. So just formulating that. So please feel free to subscribe and press the little bell button to get notifications on when new content is delivered. If there's anything you want us to cover as part of this channel, then just send in a comment or email through to us, and we'll be more than happy to include it. It's been fantastic speaking to you, Ian. Full support with what you're doing. You're fantastic. And I look forward to working with you quite a bit in the future.
My pleasure. Thanks, James. It was a really interesting chat. Thank you.
Fantastic. Cheers. And thank you to all of you out there. Speak to you soon. Goodbye.